Rick and Mort.
Hello and welcome to Greg's Fidget Spinner Hour. In this episode we'll be talking about the fidget spinner and showing you really neat tricks. Okay, maybe not tricks, but anyway. So, like I said, this is the Fidget Spinner Hour. What the? Guys, what's with the lights again? Hello? Guys, this isn't funny. Hello? Please turn the lights back on.
Introducing the PowerMac G5, the world's fastest, most powerful personal computer.
Today's personal computers use 32-bit technology. The computers of the future will use 64-bit. Well, the future is now at Apple.
Check out my new weapon of choice. Yeah.
The new PowerMac G5 is the world's first personal computer with a 64-bit processor, accelerating everything from 3D animation to scientific computation.
Oh boy, this is going to be good, I can tell.
When we started the G5, we knew we couldn't make something just a little bit faster. We had to make it a whole lot faster, and we did. In fact, it's the world's most powerful personal computer, period.
This new PowerMac G5 has bandwidth to burn. Dual 2 GHz 64-bit PowerPC processor. The PowerMac is completely new from the ground up. At its heart is the PowerPC G5 processor, which can handle over 200 in-flight instructions. That's 70% more than the fastest Pentium on the market today. To create this processor, we turned to IBM.
The G5 is an incredibly fast chip. I mean, it's so fast, so powerful that it requires extraordinary cooling. We've designed the new PowerMac G5 with 4 distinct thermal zones. Now, with thermal sensors in each zone, we can actually cool them independently. And that's important because it means we can cool them quietly. In fact, it's 2 to 3 times quieter than the G4. Everything is designed to be straightforward. The door is removable, which allows you complete access to the hard drive, to cards, to the RAM.
Up to 8 gigabytes of memory, breaking the 4 gigabyte barrier. Everything and more that you'd expect from Apple's top-of-the-line machine.
It's very important at Pixar that we be able to show our frames at full resolution, and the G5 lets us see every pixel on the screen and be able to send it around the studio. That's fantastic. After running our RenderMan benchmarks, we can now say that the G5 is the fastest desktop in the world.
My first reaction to the G5 was just one of, wow, Apple has done it again. The performance of the G5 is just incredible. We've been working very closely with Apple, in particular with Adobe Photoshop. In fact, it's up to 2 times as fast as the previous performance that we've experienced on the Macintosh. Apple's made Photoshop that much more productive.
The new G5 is the most advanced personal computer in the world, and in partnership with IBM, we're committed to seeing that it remains the most advanced for years to come.
We have refined and refined the design of the new PowerMac G5 to make it essential, to make it efficient, to make it honest.
The G5 is the best computer Apple has ever built. From the processors to the buses to the memory, this is one kick-ass machine.
Hello, I'm Greg Hrutkay of Hrutkay Mods, and welcome to episode 5 of my PowerPC series. In this episode, we'll be introducing my PowerMac G5, the late 2005 model. Now, before we go into detail about it, I'd like to cover something really special about G5s in general, the PowerMacs. What do the PowerMac G5 and an Xbox 360 have in common? Around the time the PowerMac G5s came out, the Xbox 360 started development, and the first development box for the Xbox 360 was actually based off a G5 PowerMac, which is quite interesting, and I thought I'd just pass that around. Here's a picture of one. Now, of course, this PowerMac was not part of the development. The 360's development started in 2003, and the PowerPC G5 was introduced in 2003. As you saw those videos before, those were promos and special things about the first version. And I cut out a lot of the information of the first version because it doesn't apply to this one at anything at all except for the G5. And that also is a very different processor in this model. Now, going on to talk about this system right here, I can't really tell you that it was the most expandable one. It was the first version with PCIe, and this only had two operating systems, Tiger and Leopard, that were officially supported on this system. Now that leaves some problems because there weren't many PCIe cards available for those operating systems of the time. Now that means that there's a lot of cards out there that will never support this system. And there weren't very many graphic cards either. Now, in later episodes, I'll be showing you Linux installs, how you can keep this system fresh and new. And Linux enables you to use other PCIe cards like PCIe 3, which of course wasn't supported in any operating system. And this system is very special, but it's not expandable like the earlier PowerMac G5s. All the way up to the early 2005 PowerMac G5, they had PCI-X slots, which allowed you to use any PCI card ever produced for a Mac, and other ones that were more advanced for the X slot. And of course, X and E are not compatible. So those were more expandable in the Mac world. But in Linux, this is more expandable, to a certain degree, of course. But, you know, it's more expandable than it was. Now, this PowerMac G5, I can show you in the future, and maybe some in this video. It's still very modern compared to other PowerPCs of its time. And you can still use this as a daily PC. In fact, I used this for 2 weeks straight as my main rig to do everything, including going online, checking email, and even watching videos off of YouTube. Now, of course, they were 360p videos, and it takes a bit for them to start buffering before everything smooths out, but it's still possible. And you can still use these systems as a modern-day computer and enjoy it. And I think I proved that very much so. So anyway, let's go over the specs and details about this system, and I'll show you the operating systems that are running in it right now, and then we'll wrap up the video. The late 2005 PowerMac G5 was the very last PowerPC-based Mac available from Apple. In fact, they sold it until around August 2006, I believe, when they introduced the original Mac Pro 1,1. Now, the quad-core variant of this system was the very first retail available quad-core available on any market, and it actually outbeat all quad cores by at least a year, if not 2. It was a very powerful system, and it was the first quad-core available from Apple also. Now, the quad-core variant actually outperformed Intel Macs of the Core Duo and Core Solo by a pretty good amount, until the Mac Pro came out, of course. So Apple kept selling it because it was still very powerful, and it had backwards compatibility with PowerPC-based programs, and if you ran it in Tiger, it would actually, of course, still support classic programs too. PowerPC-based programs also ran quicker on this system than it did on a Mac Pro, because the Mac Pro would have to use Rosetta, and Rosetta slowed everything down. But, of course, later on, Rosetta was dropped because Intel-based programs came out and Universal-based programs came out that supported Intel Macs, and eventually the G5 got left behind, and PowerPC-based programs did too when Lion came out. But this system was still very powerful, and this system right here in front of us is my dual-core PowerMac G5, which is a 2.0 gigahertz. It is one of the most reliable of the PowerMacs, the G5 variant, and it was one of the top performing PowerPCs of all time. Of course, the quad-core was quicker, and it was the quickest PowerPC. This, though, was a lot more reliable because the quad-core actually had a lot of problems because it was liquid-cooled, like most liquid-cooled PowerMac G5s of the time. There were earlier versions that were dual processors that were also water-cooled, like the early 2005 dual processors, and because of this there were issues with leakage. Apple actually had Delphi from the GM Radiator division basically create the cooling system for this, and there were a lot of problems because the O-rings, the rubber ones, would eventually melt because it would have a reaction to the cooling liquid that was in the system, which would cause it to leak and eventually short out the system if it wasn't taken care of. Now, there were some later coolers that were made by a different company that were more reliable, but I believe those also would eventually fail. Now, with the quad cores, if you get one, it's not a matter of if it will leak, but when did it leak, because they all basically end up leaking. So the first thing you should do is open it up and verify that it has leaked, because I guarantee you it has, and you should attempt to save it before it shorts itself out. It's hard to repair a shorted out system, and I'll show you some tips and tricks when we open this system up. So let's take a look at the system. Now, the case of this PowerMac G5 is basically the same as all PowerMac G5s ever created, although there are some internal upgrades that the other ones didn't have, which improved the system itself in cooling and performance, and also had some port changes on the back. But otherwise, the case was basically the same. The PowerMac G5's case was basically more or less the same design that carried over to the Mac Pro until the second generation, or the trash can design was introduced in 2013. So basically, this case design lasted 10 years, which is quite impressive. Now let's take a look at this system. It's basically pretty unassuming from the outside, and it is basically just any other Power Mac G5, but it has a lot of upgrades that have been done to it. There are some stains on it that I can't seem to get out of it. It was used and abused on the outside, some, but the case itself is still pretty straight. Now, if we look on the back right here, we have some interesting things, like these antennas sticking out the back. If we look here, this antenna card right here is actually a Mac Pro 3.1 based Wi-Fi Airport Extreme that was actually the in-base Airport Extreme, and it allows me to use Leopard because Leopard was a universal operating system for both PowerPC and Intel. So that means that the Intel drivers for this chip actually work in this system, and it allows me to have 5 gigahertz internet connection for the Leopard install and also in Linux, which is pretty nice. Of course, it doesn't work in Tiger because the drivers never existed for it. But I actually had a solution for that, which I'll show you later on. Now below it we have a USB 2.0 card, and if you see here, I actually had to make a bracket for it. It's not pretty, and it has made this bow out a little bit. But the seller I bought it from didn't say that it was a low-profile card, and even though the manual said that it came with an extra bracket and the box was actually sealed still, the guy said it was an OEM card, though I don't believe him, and it was in the instructions that it had a full-size bracket, and it didn't. And of course these cards aren't very, they never made many of them, so I had no other choice than to make this bracket here. So that's a little pain, but you know, that happens. Now below it we have the NVIDIA 7800 GT. This is one of the most powerful cards you could get for this system. I believe they were all aftermarket, but they were specially designed for this system, and Apple actually sold them on their Apple Store website. It's a great card for this system, and like I said, it's one of the most powerful you could get. This system also has dual gigabit Ethernet, a FireWire 800, 400, optical audio in and out, speaker jack, audio in, and 2 USB 2.0s. And the reason why I got this card here was 2 reasons. One, I think I'll end up needing all these ports too, and it's got an internal port for a Bluetooth adapter, which I'll show you also later on in this video. Now if we look down here, we'll see this C13 adapter. Now, all late 2005 Macs came with a C19 plug, which is basically designed for servers and really high-powered power supplies. This system, of course, doesn't really need it. So using a C13 adapter for this system actually shouldn't hurt anything. And even though I have a C19 cable, it's just easier because it's the only C19 cable I have. And if I move the system around, I like to just be able to plug it in with no problems. And this works totally fine. In fact, people use them all the time to power systems like this with no problems. Now, if this had a bigger power supply in it that needed a C19, I could understand why they do it, but it of course doesn't need that. So I just use a C13 adapter and we're all set. So anyway, let's open up the case and we'll take a look on the inside. Now, like I said, this is the same case that basically carried over to the Mac Pro, though there are some major differences on the inside, and the Mac Pro had an extra optical drive bay, but it opens up the same way as any other Mac Pro would. So let's open it up. We'll pull the locking tab here, and it just tilts down. And here's the insides of the system. Now if we look on the inside, we see this plastic right here. This is to help direct the air because the G5s always ran really hot, and you need all the tunnel you can get to move the air through the system, as you saw in that video earlier on. Now if we open this up, this just tilts out. Now the system's designed to actually put the fans to max, though this one for some reason doesn't seem to, when it detects that the plastic isn't installed, and it detects that by looking at this piece of metal right here. This is just a reflective piece that connects to an eye down here, and when that doesn't see that, it won't work properly, and you'll get a light on the board right here. So anyway, that's just one thing about that. Now, for all quad cores, we'll need to open this up, and I'll show you what's under this. This is just a heat sink, but to open this up here, we have to take a plastic rivet out right here. You basically can't take this plastic rivet out without destroying it, but you don't need it. This plastic rivet was here for basically warranty purposes. If you open that up, you void your warranty. The thing is, no one had a warranty now anyway, so what's the point? It doesn't hurt to take that rivet out and make sure your Mac's fine. Plus, it's a good thing to open up any G5 because Apple's thermal paste at the time, and even kinda today, sucked. So, you know, it's still a point to replace that. So anyway, let's open this piece up real quick and we'll take a look at that. The fan just pulls out, and then this right here, we start just pulling on it, and it comes out. And it's got some tabs in here, and this shroud that comes out, and we just pull it off these posts here. And this is the cooler on here. It's just a giant heat sink. It's huge. And as we look down here, we can see the pinouts right here for a second processor. The board's the same in this as in a quad core, but the dual cores actually didn't have the socket here. And there isn't a way to put an upgrade in this. Even though the bracket even is designed to use the quad core also. The differences between this system and earlier G5s is the quad core G5 in it. Well, I mean dual core. This system right here, the G5 in it is a dual core. The earlier systems had two separate G5s that were both single core. This actually has a dual core, which is the more recent revision, and it was actually more power efficient and ran cooler, though of course it still ran really hot because all G5s do. But that was what allowed the system to become a quad core. Anyway, so we'll continue on through taking this tour here. Now we have in this 16 gigabytes of DDR2. That's really overkill for a G5 Power Mac, but if I ever need it, I have it. 16 gigabytes was only available for the late 2005. Any other system before that only supported up to 8, and that isn't including the single core version from before that, which only supported up to 4 as I hear. Now, let's go into the airport situation here. The airport card, if we look right here, is just like any other airport card, available from 2003 through the end of the lifespan of all PowerPCs. This is just a regular G airport card. This isn't the card that's supposed to be in the system, though. The card that's supposed to be in the system is called the runway card, and it had both wireless G and Bluetooth built into it, but it is a very rare card and very expensive. In fact, they can be over $120 if you can find one, and that's a problem. But it was a very neat card, and the system has built-in Wi-Fi antennas down through there, which I'm not showing. You're not really able to see because of the Wi-Fi antenna I put here. Now, anyway, it of course has a different Wi-Fi connector, and that's why the built-in antenna is not compatible. But it's still a very neat way to do it, and to actually get a card like this, the easiest way is the way I did it, which is buy an original Airport Extreme like this, and it's got a airport card built into it, the Extreme card. And you can also use the antenna that's built into it for this. This is actually the Airport Extreme antenna, which I bent and actually made it fit into here, and it looks almost factory if you take a good look at it. It looks really cool, and it gets great reception. Now, of course, I only have this airport card in here for Tiger support. This also works in Leopard, but I have it disabled in Leopard to use the card up in here in the top slot. But we'll get to that when we get there. This is basically all that is underneath on the bottom. So let's go up to the top. I'm going to grab a screwdriver and pull all cards except for the USB out, because the USB is a pain to get back in. But this is just like any PC. It's not like a Mac Pro where you just unscrew 2 screws and a bracket pops out. This is actually a bit of a pain because it still uses screws. And these screws, in fact, have a problem where they can just fall into the fan shroud, and then you'll have to pull this apart or tilt the thing upside down and try to shake them out, which is a pain also. So I'll take these screws out and we'll take a better look at the 7800 GT and the Airport Extreme card from that Mac Pro 3,1. So let's go. Okay, so I have the system set up right now to just easily pull out the cards. Right now we're looking at my 7800 GT. Before we continue, I'd like to show you that most of the PowerMac G5s came with this NVIDIA 6600 GT, I believe. I'm not too sure on the in moniker there. But it was an okay workstation card, but it wasn't really meant for gaming. And I actually built this system for gaming, which we'll show you in the future how it can game. I do the quotations because there weren't many games that, really used this card here. But, it's still really neat to have this. This card was one of the most powerful cards you could get for the system. And this card was, of course, proprietary Apple, and it will only work in PowerPC-based systems because it's open firmware flashed. But considering that this was the only PCIe-based computer, this of course won't work in any other PowerPC, so it only works in the PowerMac G5, the late 2005 model. Anyway, the PowerMac G5, the late one, actually also supported I think it was a 4500 Quadro card, which you could special order for this, I believe, with the system. If not, it was an upgrade card. I'm not too sure on that. But this, of course, was too. I believe this was the second most powerful, if not the Quadro was a little more powerful in compute. Of course, it was more powerful, but in gaming, I think this was the second most powerful. There was a GTX model, I believe, and this was, you know, half that basically, and it had half the video RAM, but it was still a very good deal. So anyway, let's pull this card out and we'll take a quick look at it. Right now, it of course needs a 6-pin power, which is plugged into the board right here between the bracket that holds the card in and the front fan. So we'll pull this plug out. This is the same type of plug that is in a Mac Pro, and it uses the mini 6-pin to plug into the board. They're both compatible, and you know, all PCIe slots except the last slot right here for the graphics card don't have locking tabs like most PCs do. So that's different. So we'll pull up on my locking tab and pull the card out. And it pulls right out. Now this card's so long, it's got this special bracket on here to keep the card from drooping, which it's not really needed because it's laying on this piece of metal here. But, you know, it keeps it from drooping, which is nice, I guess. The problem is, since it's so long, it's a bit of pain to get out, because we have to first tilt it this way and then pull it back and pull it out, which it's difficult because you automatically just think to push it in like this and it catches. But anyway, this is the card. You know, there's not much to say about it, but it's an interesting looking card, to say the least, because of the bracket and stuff. But that's the 7800 GT. Then we have the Airport Extreme card from the Mac Pro 3,1, which is plugged into this adapter to convert the mini PCIe to a full-size PCIe. We'll pull this card out. And as we can see, it's literally just a Mac Pro card. Pretty darn cool. But, you know, there's nothing really special with it other than that. So, you know, that's that. So anyway, now that we have those cards out, we can take a quick look at the USB card. And if we look right here, this is my Bluetooth adapter. It just plugs into here, and that keeps me from needing a runway card. So anyway, so let's go into the top. This has a dual-layer DVD super drive burner in it, and a 2 terabyte hard drive, which is kind of overkill for a G5, but it allows me to do this system right. You can use this system as a server for media and stuff. A little loud and very, very power inefficient. But, you know, you could do that, and it's also enables me to install as many operating systems as I can find for it and play around with them. So we'll take this out real quick. It's got a very interesting bracket system to hold this in. As we can see here, it comes with some extra screws to plug in more drives. But here we have a locking tab. The top drive actually tilts downwards and comes out, as we can see this tray right here. It is a very interesting thing. The bottom drive just slides in. So we'll pop the top drive out, and you just pull on it until it comes out to here. Then it drops down, and you can pull it out all the way. Very interesting. It's a Seagate drive. In fact, this is one of the same drives that's in my Mac Pro 3,1. that came from that NAS drive. But you know, it's just another hard drive. And then to put it back in, we just line it up on the bottom, you know, pulling the wires out the way so you don't like grab them on anything. You just line it up on the bottom tray, you push it upwards, and then tilt it up, and push it in, and then you can just flip the locking tab back down once it's all the way in, which it isn't. Or is it? Yeah, it is. It's in, and then you can just plug the wires back in, and you're good. So anyway, let's plug this system up, and let's take a look at the operating systems. Then we'll wrap up this video. Okay, so now my G5 is plugged in my KVM. Now before we continue, I'd like to explain to you again that this series is to show you how well these computers can still perform today. I'm not telling you to go out and just buy one, because the power to performance is just not that great anymore. It was very good for its time, and in fact, of course, the Power Macs were the top-of-the-line personal computers of their time. And this G5 was up until towards the end of its lifespan, where it just basically started getting overran by Intel and other CPUs out there. But still, it's a very good performer, and it has aged pretty gracefully, considering. And basically, like I said earlier, I have used this as a daily driver for 2 weeks straight. It was very good, and in fact, I still use it almost daily to do various little things. But like I'll show you, this is still a very good system. I'll also show you some quick things about gaming and whatnot. So let's get into it. So first off, we'll start it up, and I'll show you the time it takes between the open firmware engaging and it totally booting up. So let's go. Okay, so the bong started up, which means the open firmware is starting. The lights have kicked on, and there's open firmware totally loaded. That took roughly 40 seconds. Like I said, open firmware is slow on all PowerPCs. It doesn't matter what it is, they're all pretty darn slow. But once, like I said before, once it's loaded, it runs really quick. Like I said there, it took roughly, what, 26 seconds or so for it to get into the operating system, which is right here. Pretty neat. So anyway, let's get into the gaming performance and whatnot, and we'll just really show this sucker off. Okay, so before we start covering other things about the system, I thought I'd quickly cover the reason why the fans were so loud when the system started up. Don't worry, they don't stay like that, at least on most Power Mac G5s. The sensors in this system are actually software controlled. When the system starts up, it is in a low fan mode, waiting basically for the operating system to load. If it doesn't load up within, I believe, 2 minutes, the fans ramp up to 100% because it thinks it's overheating. But once the software is loaded, it's fine, and you can still relax from the loud fan noise. But, of course, it still could be a problem. If the system crashes, the sensors panic and the fans shoot up to 100 again. That's when you know the system's crashed. That's usually the first sign, especially if you're away from the computer. The system doesn't tend to crash very often, though, so that's not usually a problem. But that's just a quick tidbit about it. And this was also one of the first systems where you could actually monitor the temperature on the system. I use iStat menus to see that. Anyway, so like I said before, the fans are controlled by software. If you're running an operating system that doesn't have fan control in it, like certain versions of Linux, you will have to install drivers for it. Otherwise, the fans will always run at 100%, and trust me, you don't want that to happen. Anyway, so let's get on to the performance and stuff about this system. Okay, so I thought I'd start off by playing some Quake 4 to show you just how well this thing performs in gaming using Universal games and PowerPC games. I also have Doom 3, Call of Duty 2, and a few other classic games that were AAA titles of its time, and it performs well with. But we're just going to show you Quake 4, just a few quick levels of it. Well, not levels, but certain scenes of it, and just a little gameplay. And if you notice any screen tearing or anything like that, it's not the computer, it's actually because I'm playing on a cinema display, which of course aren't made for gaming. So let's get started.
Good point. Kane, hop in the cannon and see if you can't blow open the door to the access corridor. Nice shooting, Kane. This is Lieutenant Boss to all squads. We're in business. Make a sweep of the Hannibal landing zone. Rhodes, do you read me?
Yes, sir.
Get to my position.
On my way, sir.
This turned out to be pretty fun, I guess.
Hannibal's landing cycle has begun.
And that's some gameplay. So let's get back to the desktop. And here we are. We're all back to where we were, and here's a little proof. Dual 2 GHz PowerPC G5. So anyway, let's get back to the other topics at hand. Okay, so let's go into details about this system. We'll start off by, of course, talking about the specs again. It's a dual core 2 GHz G5 with 16 gigs of DDR2. This was the only version, the late 2005 was the only one that had DDR2. The earlier ones had DDR, DDR1, but of course it was called DDR. So that allows you to only have a max of 8 gigs because that's basically the biggest DIMMs they had at the time. And there's 8 slots. So anyway, we'll go into more info. And as we can see, here's the hardware overview. And we have my super drive here and my SATA drive here. So that's the SATA in this system is SATA 1, which is 1.5 gigabit, which is okay. You could also upgrade to a Sonic card, which allows you to have SATA 2 speeds. There's not much of a need for that unless you really need it. You could also put SSDs in this, but a lot of people found that it's more complicated than it sounds unless you get an OWC drive. So it's just because a lot of SATA 3 SSDs just don't work with it. SATA 2s tend to, and even though the SATA 3 should be backwards compatible, they tend not to be. So, you pay for what you get. It could be a headache. Then again, it can be really cool, and it will increase the speed some. So anyway, here's the airport card. This is the Mac Pro 3,1 card. As we can see, it's connected to my 5 gigahertz right here. If we go up to here and look at my networks, we can see that here's my 2.4, here's my 5. It's connected to the 5. And if we go down to, for instance, system preferences and go over to network, you can see both airport cards and that the G card is actually disabled. Here it is. But the N card is enabled and it works great. We are connected to a 5 gigahertz band. So anyway, there's that. We can also show you things like Photoshop. The most recent Photoshop released was CS4. And there's some issues you can get into with CS4, but it still works great. We'll open up a PSD file. This was made off of CS5 off of my Mac Pro. But other than the fonts not being on this system, so it will give an error message, it will still give you an example of just how well this works. So we'll open up the PSD. It gives the error message, but then we can edit it just like anything. And if it didn't have this font right here on it, you wouldn't even get the error message. But anyway, so we can move things around like, let's see here, something we can move here. Oops. Clicking all the wrong buttons here. Move that around. It does lag some, but it's still pretty fine. It's still very usable. You can still edit video pictures with it, which is pretty neat. And if we go into other things about this, we've got other programs that we can look at. For instance, we have Final Cut Pro 6. I believe you could also run 7. I haven't been able to get it hacked to get it to work because it was officially originally universal, and then Apple dropped PowerPC support for it, so it's a bit of a pain to get installed, and I'm still working on that. But we also have iMovie 09. We can do some handbrake and convert videos and stuff. We got my CS4. Sorry, I'm losing my voice there. Here's TeamViewer. This is, I think, 7. So you can't log into any new computer with a newer TeamViewer, but you can log into this one and control it over the internet, though it can be a pain to set up. My Time Machine works. That's another reason to have Leopard. It helps a lot. Then we have the PPC App Store, which is really neat. It allows you to install programs that are PowerPC supported, like the most recent versions of them, which is very handy. And then we have other things like 10.4 which is basically a PowerPC port of Firefox 45 with the back port of the security updates to 52. At least the most recent version. If you're watching this in the future, it's probably going to be different. But it's modern and it's updated. And then right next to it we have WebKit, which is based off the original Safari that's on this with all the new security updates and a lot of new features on it, which comes in handy. Like I said, I've used this computer as a daily driver, and these two browsers have helped me do that. For instance, 10.4 loads up just like Firefox. It is slower. I'm telling you right now, it's slower, but it's still a very usable web browsing PC in general. Things do take a bit to load sometimes, and everything is, the scrolling's a little slow, but it's still very usable. We'll go over to, like, for instance, Facebook. If I can type this in. And here comes Facebook. I didn't hit enter. There we go. This is the fully featured Facebook. It is actually a lot quicker. I think my internet's been slowed down some because people are moving back in. But, you know, it's still fully featured. It works totally fine. There's no issues with that. Of course, it's still a bit slow, but it works. So that's cool. Then we have other things we can do with Tin4 Fox, which it's defaulted basically on WebKit. Like for instance, we can go over to the preferences and go to Tin4 Fox, and then we can change the user agent to, for instance, the Safari on iPads, and that will enable mobile websites. So we'll refresh this page, and now it's a mobile page, which is a lot quicker. It loads a heck of a lot quicker. You'd be amazed how much quicker it loads, but then again, you've got screen resolution problems because it's rendering mobile pages on whatever screen resolution you are on, which can be a bit of a pain, but still fully featured. And this is what it would look like if you logged into Facebook on WebKit. Also, other things you can do with this system. You can watch YouTube. No kidding. No lie. First off, let's switch this back to the other one here. Go back to Tin4 Fox. Switch back to Tin4 Fox web agent. Then we'll go over to YouTube. This is the fully featured YouTube. Works totally fine. You're only going to be watching this in 360p, which can get to be a bit of a pain. It's not the best looking, but it works, and it works quite well. We'll go over to my page. Go here, and here's my page. Open that up. And now G5s are basically the only ones that can smoothly use YouTube. But, you know, that's just the sacrifice you get with still using a PowerPC. If you don't want to use a PowerPC, more power to you when it comes to using YouTube. Now, at first when this loads up, you have to basically pause it because it gets laggy like that. So what you do is you pull it back a little bit, and then when you hit play, it will play like normal, nice and smooth. We can go to full screen. Okay, we need to pause it again for a second. Once you get the video going, it works. In this episode, I will be showing you how to upgrade your Mac notebook, either an iBook G3 or G4, or PowerBook G3 or G4. See, now we're all synced up. Right here. It's still pretty quick, and it works good. To one of these. This is an mSATA drive. This is a 250. So we'll get out of that. mSATA drive. And that's basically Leopard here. Oh, and one last thing I forgot to show you. The other nice things about running Leopard. Right now we have my Mac Pro running, and we can log straight into it just using the share screen feature. And here it is. This is my Mac Pro. It's actually connected to this monitor right now. And if we can see, here's the pointer. If we move it, we're actually sharing the screen. And that's another neat feature. So I'm going to go into the boot menu here. We're going to pause the video, and then we'll load it back up and cover more things about the system. We've got 2 more operating systems we're going to be going over, and I'll explain it to you in the next part of the video. So let's go. Okay, so now we're in the Open Firmware boot menu, and as we can see here, we have 3 operating systems. On the left, we have my Leopard install. In the center, we have my Linux install, which we'll cover in the next segment after we cover the next operating system. And on the right, we have the next segment, which is the Tiger install. Now, of course, since this is a later open firmware version, we can actually use the arrow keys to select the drives, which makes the pointer a lot less needed, which, of course, is still pretty darn sluggish. So we'll select Tiger and hit Enter. and we are now in Tiger. I always have this thing set up to automatically log into Classic, and so we'll first connect this to my Wi-Fi, because sometimes for some odd reason it doesn't like to automatically connect. I've got to fix that. But it works, trust me. We'll show you in a second. But since my Classic is should have been started, it didn't. Darn it. Since the Classic is now started, we've got Classic up, everything's working. We can play games, old Classic games, or run Classic programs. For instance, want to play some Oregon Trail? Here's the Oregon Trail. As we can see, Classic is running, and we can even read about the Oregon Trail. That's it. It's working. Everything works on it. We can close it out. And then what I have installed on Tiger is the PowerPC App Store, a few other things. Let's go over the network first. Since the other card's not supported in Tiger, this is my wireless GE, which of course we could show you some more about what's showing up here. We'll go to about this Mac and more info, and this is what the regular card looks like. It's connected to the normal G connection, or the 2.4 gigahertz, of course. And if we open up 10.4 Fox, this is the same one as in Leopard. We'll connect it straight automatically to the internet. Now, of course, this is going to load a bit slower, being wireless G and stuff. The max speed I've ever gotten out of this card is, I think, 10 megabits a second download, compared to over 200 and something on my wireless in connection in Leopard. But it works. Another tip for anyone that's wanting a full-featured browser is to use an ad blocker to help load web pages faster. It comes in handy, I'm telling you. It loads everything a lot quicker. But so that's 10.4 Fox. So we'll close out of that, and we'll talk about a few other things. Actually, let's go into the boot menu, and we'll cover the Linux install, because that's basically it for Tiger. So we're now back into the boot menu. As we can see, once again, here are my 3 operating systems. Now, I've showed you earlier that you can still use your Power Mac G5 as any other modern computer online doing modern things. The thing is, it's not as secure. The browsers themselves are still secure, but the operating system really isn't. Leopard's last software update was in, I believe, 2011, the security updates for it, and Tiger was in 2009. But what if I told you there's still an operating system that still exists, that supports PowerPCs, and will allow you to have security updates and whatnot all the way through 2019? Well, there is. What I am currently using is Ubuntu Mate, which is the 16.04.2, I think, LTS release, which is stands for long-term support. It will be supported through 2019. It works really well. There are some issues, which we'll cover. This install is actually the best featured, I believe, and most stable of all Linux installs that are still available for PowerPC. And this will work on any PowerPC, at least it should, from G3 all the way through any G5. And it works quite well. But there, of course, are problems. Since Linux is kind of a universal operating system for basically every platform out there, there are problems. Certain drivers aren't included immediately. For instance, your airport cards won't work. Usually. The wireless B airport cards will. They have those drivers built in, but the extreme cards, the G and N and all those, don't. Of course, you won't have an N unless you do what I did, but those won't work. you'll have to remotely install the drivers, which I have. And there's a few other problems, which we'll cover. But the biggest problem I have is there's no hardware video acceleration support for my Power Mac right now. The problem is the NVIDIA drivers just won't load properly because of the ROM and all the weird boot stuff that happens with the Power Mac G5. It worked earlier in earlier builds, but it won't work now. And there's a way to fix that, but I've just been too lazy to get around to it. And the software acceleration's fine for what I need it to do. The problem is I have to type in a command before booting it into Linux, which we'll see in a second. But let's get into it. Oh, and one last thing. When I boot up, there'll probably be some error messages. Not all programs work perfectly fine. They'll run, usually, but they'll give you spit out random errors. And for some reason, the Linux install works with my Bluetooth adapter, but doesn't tend to like it for some reason, and it likes to spit out an error every once in a while, and that's usually the one that pops up when it boots up. Now, the errors will not prevent you from using the operating system. It's still very fluid and very, very quick. So let's get into it. We'll choose L for boot. And now here I need to type in the command, which I'll get right back to you. Okay, so I got the command typed in. We'll hit enter. And it starts loading. Now, if you don't get Linux to completely boot up within that time frame I've talked about in the past, the fans will eventually boot up, speed up to 100%, and that will go away once Linux is fully booted. So let's continue with the boot. And here we go. Now I have a Sierra theme installed on here just to give it a more fluid Mac feel to it. And there is the Bluetooth error. Get rid of that. And here it is. This is Ubuntu Mate. Now if you have hardware acceleration enabled, you'll get a huge scrambled picture on this Power Mac G5. But earlier models that didn't have NVIDIA cards will boot up with the hardware acceleration enabled, and so should probably all the rest of the PowerPCs. I haven't completely tested all my systems yet, but I've gotten my Mini and my Titanium and my Power Mac G4, Quicksilver, and a few others to run this with no problems. Well, you get problems with any Linux install. But as we can see here, it's fully featured. We've got many different programs and stuff. I'm not going to show you much about it because I'm still myself learning a lot about Linux. But it works. Everything works quite well, in fact. But, you know, it's just Linux. There's not a whole lot more that I can say about it. It just works, usually. And I just keep saying usually because there's always something not working quite right. But, you know, it still works. And, you know, we've got different programs down here, like the Ubuntu Software Center, which is kind of like the App Store. It allows you to install programs easier on Linux. It works. The one that comes with Ubuntu Mate I can't seem to get to work, so I just uninstalled that and put the regular Ubuntu on here, and it works great, as we can see here. And we even have stuff like Midori, which is a PowerPC based browser. It's the WebKit, only for Linux. So it's kind of Safari based. Then we have just regular Firefox. It's got Firefox, it's fully featured. And we've got things like Rhythmbox, which is kind of like an internet radio. It's a little weird, but it works. And another thing about installing Linux, especially on a Power Mac, G5, your sound probably won't work at first, but it will start working eventually. Let's do a quick search. We'll search me. But like I said, the audio might not work, but once you force it to start working, it works. You just have to type in a command and it will start right up and work every single time. And as we can see here, Linux is a lot more fluid, a lot quicker, and a lot of people just automatically just install this when they get a new PowerPC, and they delete everything else, which and they just use it as their normal operating system, which more power to them. I would still rather have Mac OS on here too. So that's what I do. I just triple boot on this system. But anyway, that's basically it for this episode. I hope you guys have stuck around. I know it's been a lot longer video than usual, just like the last one, although I believe this one's a lot longer. It was a very, very fun yet kind of painful video to film, but I enjoyed it. I'll probably end up leaving some kind of comment on the screen saying just how much of a pain it was to edit, because by the time I'm finished filming this and stuff, I still have probably over an hour of material to condense down to whatever length this video is going to be. So yeah, I'm going to hate myself at the end of this, but I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And anyway, thank you for watching, and this has been a Hrutkay Mods video.